So good evening, everybody. Let's begin the evening's review of the Aryadeva verses with our motivation. Sort of taking a little bit of inspiration from the quiz questions last week on the qualities of a suitable vessel to be able to hear the teachings on emptiness. Let's rejoice and touch into the qualities that we may have presently. Perhaps we have some Dharma wisdom, maybe some curiosity, some keen interest. And then let's also touch into the qualities we would like to grow. Perhaps we would like to deepen our respect for our teachers and the teachings. And then maybe connect to the ones we may want to cultivate, like attentiveness, sincerity, and being unprejudiced. So whatever ones you think that you have that are strong, ones that you want to grow, and ones that you are aspiring to develop, let's rejoice in our efforts. Because we have this very precious opportunity to hear teachings on emptiness, given to us by a very qualified spiritual teacher, who was given them by her very qualified spiritual mentors, who then were given them by their teachers all the way back to Aryadeva, and then farther back even to our root teacher, the Buddha. So to really rejoice at this unbroken lineage of pure teachings from the Buddha all the way up to this very present time. And that by thinking about them and discussing them as Dharma friends, we can grow these qualities so important to have if we're ever going to realize the nature of reality. To realize emptiness directly. And along with understanding emptiness, let's try and cultivate as well the vast bodhicitta motivation, like those who have taught us, have been so kind, have benefited sentient beings most of their lives, if not all of their lives. And then for us to have the long-term aspiration of awakening for the benefit of all beings. So may we be able to cultivate those qualities found in our teachers, those we are beginning to develop in ourselves, and to rejoice in that in each other. So let's listen and study with that kind of motivation now. So we are continuing with chapter 12, which is refuting true existence of that which is viewed. Jamyan wants to listen to the teachings. We have a kitty who's outside who wants to listen to the teachings, but we're not quite ready to invite him in. So the second half of the quiz asks us to think about different kinds of wrong views, so we're continuing with that idea. Where our minds and others' minds go astray. Why, for some folks, emptiness is such a frightening concept. How the understanding of emptiness is the cause for liberation and awakening. And how, I would say right now, probably our teachers who are qualified have to be skillful on how and when emptiness is taught and to whom it's taught so it can be received in a beneficial way. So these are part of what we're going to address in the quiz questions tonight. So I've gone to the transcriptions for Venerable's teachings, the commentaries that she did for each of the verses. We're on 288 to 300. The second half of chapter 12. And I've also turned, as Venerable Sompton did last week, to some of our qualified spiritual mentors, and also to one of Venerable's Dharma friends who has come here and taught at the Abbey a number of times and wrote a wonderful book. So I'm going to unpack it, because what I found with some of the questions after Venerable's commentary, I looked and kind of put it together. I wanted to unpack it a little bit more so I'd have some better understanding of what she's trying to get us to understand. Not just kind of a cut and paste sort of thing, but to really go looking and say, well, can I get a deeper understanding of this so I can share it? So I went to, as Venerable Samten did last week, to I think probably one of the most beautiful books on emptiness. It's called Insight into Emptiness by Khenser Jampa Tegchok. Just very accessible, very detailed. I just love this book. Appearance and Reality, which is by Guy Newland, a really accessible, kind of general on the general book on the tenet systems, because there's questions here about lower Buddhist tenet systems. And then I found this book in the Abbey library. It's called Practicing Wisdom by the Dalai Lama. This also talks about the different schools and about, let's see, I'll give you a few little hints here. A lot of just the refutations on the different schools, but also in a very accessible way. So I went looking, and so I've got a few little things to add to Venerable's commentary. And what I want to do tonight is I want to do the same thing that Venerable Samten did last week, is I want to invite the folks who are from afar with us to first give it their best shot, and then we'll try to. I think we can hear them when you respond, Venerable Damcho. Can people on the YouTube hear their answers to the questions? Okay. And then we'll kind of open up the group here at the Abbey, and then if there's anything else that I can add, we'll try to do a collaborative effort here tonight. So one of the things that I kind of struggled with the questions is that almost all the questions have got like 3 or 4 subpoints underneath them. And I had some difficulty on trying to figure out, Venerable looked like she was trying to get us to look at a particular verse from different perspectives, but at times I couldn't figure out, well, what about the second point? Is she trying to get us to figure out that doesn't sound like the first point? So I found myself struggling a little bit about, well, what perspective is she trying to get us to think about here? And it starts with question number 9, because I got a few answers here, but they look to be could be interchangeable with the 2 points, the 2 questions. Okay, so we're going to start with the first, which is, why are proponents of the lower tenet systems afraid of the emptiness of inherent existence? And then the sub-little question underneath that is, why do they reject it? Okay, so she's got these 2 separated out, and we'll see if folks were able to figure out what the first question was asking and what the second question was asking. So, any takers?
So for the first part, they think it means nothingness, right? So they reject, so that means the people in the lower schools, and they think it means nothingness, and they reject it because they can see that things exist, and they believe in cause and effect, and wrongly believe that the prasangikas are negating all existence.
Okay, so they're thinking that emptiness of inherent existence means nothingness, and that
And so because I guess with your senses you can see things exist, there's cause and effect, and then they wrongly think that
this is refuting that there's nothing there. Okay.
And another person says it goes against their views that, and they're unfamiliar or uncomfortable with it, and therefore they fear it.
Okay, so it's totally opposite from what they're thinking. Anybody else got some a little bit more in-depth?
Well, I don't know about in-depth, but another kind of sub-point about that is that also lower tenet systems are also looking at a middle way between the 2 extremes, and they see that the view of emptiness is a nihilistic view that is an extreme, right? So they reject it on that basis.
Okay, so they think that it's gone just too far. I found a little section in His Holiness's book, Practicing Wisdom, that basically sums up that they can't resolve the assertion of the higher schools that things are illusion-like, that they exist one way but appear in another and therefore are not ultimately real. Okay, there's the first conundrum. They argue then, how can we venerate the objects of refuge like the Buddha and accumulate merit with illusion-like objects? They argue that the middle way system, or the Madhyamaka philosophy of emptiness, which denies true existence and posits existence only in nominal terms, okay, by being merely labeled, that the idea of rebirth becomes untenable because sentient beings become illusion-like. So how can they take rebirth? How can they create karma? How can they create virtue? How can they become awakened? So going to that, they just get scared. It just shakes up their whole idea of how they practice the Dharma and how they think the Buddha exists, how they think sentient beings exist. So that really does shake up, as one of the folks said, it just shakes up the idea that there's some substance, there's some inherent existence out there, and that the upper schools are just totally throwing that out by this illusion-like, that things appear like illusions or like mirages or like dreams. And then, just to give you an idea on how they actually do look at things, Guy gives a very, very quick little summary on the lower schools. So the Great Exposition School, in their system, there's a strong sense that everything must have its own substance in order to exist at all. You could see how then the higher schools are going to totally challenge that. That's theirs. For the Sutra systems, they assert that all phenomena are established by way of their own character as the basis of words and conceptuality. So there's got to be something out there that we are imputing concepts and terms and words. So it's got to be established there, in some way. There's got to be something out there to name. And the mind-only school say that all ultimate truths are ultimately established, which means existing by way of their own nature, and that impermanent conventional truths must be truly existent inasmuch they are actually produced from causes and conditions. So that's where they come around. They say there's just, even causing conditions, there's something out there that gets produced. Even impermanent conventional truths, there's something out there. So you can see that how all of this can be threatened and can be turned upside down by the Madhyamaka saying that, emptiness of inherent existence is is how things exist. Let's see, His Holiness said something as well. Okay, so this is for the second one, is why do they reject it? The point is made by the lower schools is that without accepting the intrinsic and objective reality of things, there would be no causality, no way that phenomena could function. To all of these objections, the Madhyamaka respond by stating that although they maintain that all things and events are illusion-like, in that they do not have an independent reality, they do accept the validity of causality and other functions of the relative world. The Madhyamaka state that the reality of the conventional world is not destroyed by their logic of emptiness, but is left completely intact. So that's kind of the crux of the matter. They both assert that how they think things exist is viable, and this is where they disagree. Any other additions to why this is a difficult?
I wanted to check. I don't think that, well, just what I've heard about, to be clear about the mind only, even though they hold it's truly existent, they don't think there's an external object, which is a little bit what it sounded like.
Well,
Just to be clear.
Yeah, but they put them into when they talk about the upper systems, they don't have them. The Madhyamakas are separated out from the other.
Indeed. But what I just heard you say is that even the mind only says there's something out there, and they do hold it as truly existent, and I don't know any more than that, but to say that it's out there in the same way that the other two
Right.
are is
Right.
not totally right. So just to
Must be truly existent in as much as they are actually produced from causes and conditions.
Yeah.
So there's something going on there that makes that happen out there, whether it exists inherently or not.
They live in inherent existence too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, up and on.
Someone asked, are Chitta Matrins considered lower schools?
Mm-hmm. According to this middle school,
It's how you, it's all a matter of how you're classified.
Yeah.
Sometimes the lower schools are just referring to the first two, sometimes they're referring referring to
views.
the first three. It's just, it's a
Yeah,
minor reference. Sometimes they call it two higher schools and two lower schools.
yeah. In this book, guide differentiates and putting them down in the lower schools and puts them up in the middles. The middle way system is the Madhyamikas. So it all depends on what you're referring to. Any other additions onto that? Okay. So for number 10, we've got also a few of those points underneath each other, and this is once again where maybe some clarity, at least for me, because I wasn't quite figuring out where my answers belonged on some of these because they sounded almost too close. So the first part of question number 10 is, what are the disadvantages of falling to each of the two extremes? The second one is, why is lapsing from ethics preferable to lapsing from the view? And why is falling to the extreme of absolutism not as bad as falling to the extreme of annihilation? Which is what I thought the first question was answering. So I'm going to let folks help me out here. So what are the disadvantages of falling to each of the two extremes?
You can't free yourself from samsara.
That's a big one.
They're both wrong views.
They're both wrong views.
I'll read you a number of responses online.
Okay.
So someone says, if you think nothing exists, then that precludes karma and so forth. Right? But if you think it inherently exists, then that precludes dependent arising.
So that's what they're saying, that the absolutisms say that you think things are permanent precludes.
Yeah, dependent arising. The disadvantages, I guess, of falling to each of the two extremes.
Yeah.
If you fall to nihilism, then karma can't function.
But I'm not sure absolutism negates dependent arising, because even the lower schools
It's true.
agree that dependent arising exists.
Some other ones, the nihilism risks us thinking that nothing matters and cause and effect doesn't exist, so we create negative karma when we engage in non-virtue.
Mm-hmm.
And with absolutism, we assert something exists that does not exist, which causes our afflictions. And then, like then Gotama said, we stay stuck in ignorance and cyclic existence.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lose-lose situation. I pretty much had the same thing. Also, too, I think that the extreme of absolutism, we see everything as solid and independent, permanent, then we get into a serious self-grasping at everything. The cause of our happiness, all that stuff out there, makes or breaks what's going on for us. Now, why is lapsing from ethics preferable to lapsing from the view? How are these related to the first question, too?
Well,
Yeah.
this is just what I think. If you lose the view, if you lose your ethics but you have the view, you'll get back to your ethics. If you lose the view,
View.
you're going to lose everything.
Throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Oh. If you lose your ethics, you do nothing but create negative karma. You're going to lose everything. You lose the view, you have a little absolutism, but you're still doing virtuous actions because you have good ethical conduct. There's hope.
So the view, but the view that they're referring to, is it the view of the either of the two extremes, or is it the view of seeing things as inherently existent? See, I wasn't quite sure which view she was talking, but she was still referring.
She talked quite a bit about ethics and the view, right? Let's see where.
It's preferable to not lose the view, the way she wrote.
Yeah. Is more detrimental than a lapse from ethical conduct. Never reject the view of emptiness. If we mess up on ethical conduct, since the result of ethical conduct is a fortunate rebirth, we miss out on a fortunate rebirth. If we mess up on cultivating the view, we won't attain liberation or full awakening, and we also won't even get a fortunate rebirth because we create so much negative karma due to our wrong views. We also do not have the reliable antidote to the wrong views. If we have wrong views, we've given up the antidote itself. Anything from our cyber friends?
What
Okay,
you said.
okay.
I have two, like, wrong views can engender repeated negative actions. She gave the example of killing people to go to heaven.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, kind of wrong views could send you
On a
lower
slight,
realms longer,
right,
do more.
right, rather than the ethical conduct lapsing. Yeah, at least that's what I pulled out of some of the commentary. The other point that she had in there too was that if there's someone who is a suitable vessel gets discouraged due to somebody who out of jealousy or meanness or whatever is intervening with the teachings or with the contemplation of emptiness, so that person who creates these obstacles, they won't have a fortunate rebirth as a human being, because they're creating not only so much negativity because of their own wrong view, but they're also interfering with somebody who may have some aspiration to understand emptiness, may be a suitable vessel. So she said we have to be careful.
Destructive actions, the heaviest is wrong views. Of all of them.
Yeah. You're looking for something, Venerable Ginny, that might...
Yeah, I was looking for something, I can't find it, but it was, there's something in there about, well, anyway.
About the...
It goes on to the next question about, absolutism. You can have
Yes.
that view of absolutism, but
yes,
and still be creating enough virtue to be able to stay on.
right, right. But you're also going to be falling into the yeah, yes.
Geshe Jampa Tekchok talks about that, and he says, it would be better to fall to the extreme of absolutism. On the basis of thinking there is something findable from the side of the object, someone will still do purification practices,
Mm-hmm.
they'll accumulate merit, they'll listen to teachings and meditate, and eventually through doing these activities, his or her mind will develop, and he or she will start to wonder if things really exist in the way we assume them to. At that time, we'll be better prepared to meditate on emptiness and realize things are completely non-existent from your own side.
Yeah, because when I saw the view, I went right to nihilism on that question. I didn't even go to absolutism, and that's where I focused on. Okay, so falling to the extreme of absolutism, as Venerable Sumpton read from Khensa Jampa Tekchok, is not as bad as falling to the extreme of annihilation. Anything to add on to that? We can still manage to create virtue. We still do purification. We still believe in cause and effect. Rebirth, although they're all permanent and independent and existing from their own side. Anything out there, Venerable Dr. Difford? Okay. Yeah, Venerable did a lot on the dangers of falling to extreme nihilism. And I sometimes, when I was thinking about that, because I just want to just stand as far away from that as possible, but when I really think about the way that I behaved in my life, I was pretty much a nihilist. I didn't really care. I mean, I didn't really think that my behavior had any ethical component. I didn't think that I was going to experience a lot of the results of my actions. And most of it was just because I was just so into the happiness of this life that I didn't really think about it. So I think that pre-Dharma, I would say that I was a lot more, not so much that I didn't believe in anything, but I didn't believe that my actions had some ethical components to them. I think that was a huge piece.
Did she say much about the second question in her teachings? The why the actions and ethics preferable?
Well, that's the part that I read, that she said that if we mess up on ethical conduct, since the result of ethical conduct is a fortunate rebirth, we miss out on a fortunate rebirth. If we mess up on cultivating the view, we won't attain liberation or full awakening. And we also won't even get a fortunate rebirth because we will create so much negative karma due to our wrong view. Does that answer your question, Venerable Tarpa? And then she also talked a little bit about interfering with somebody else who might be a suitable vessel by our own cynicism and our own deluded doubt. Can also cause trouble. Okay, so now we're getting into what are the disadvantages of teaching people new to the Dharma about emptiness? And does that mean that we should not mention emptiness at all when we're talking about the Dharma? And then what kind of background should they have first before we explain emptiness to them? I keep saying I would never want to explain emptiness to anybody without like having like this total transcription from my teacher. Anyway, what are the disadvantages? What can happen if we start talking about emptiness to people who are new to the Dharma?
They always tell that story about the monk who was listening to a teaching and on emptiness, and all of a sudden he grabbed his jersey because he got really scared that he wasn't there. So you could scare people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
No?
He's not somebody
He-
who's new, though.
No, he's
Yeah.
meditating.
Exactly.
He was on
But-
the inferential.
But if you start at the beginning, that's a good way to scare somebody off of the Dharma because they just don't understand. It's like, what do you mean I'm not? Nothing.
There.
You can't scare people.
Yeah.
Some folks online are saying people who misunderstand and reject the teachings, which creates negative karma and they become nihilistic. Then I went on to say that for people who are uneducated in the Dharma, who are very immersed in different kinds of views, like a view of God or a view of the soul, or not, and then they're not receptive vessels, and teaching them about emptiness can make them create a lot of negative karma, because they will either repudiate the teaching, as mentioned, and never want to hear it again, or they'll misunderstand it and think that it means nothing exists, which is very dangerous. Is there? And then there's the aspect of, the bodhisattva vow, and making sure that we don't teach to people who aren't prepared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think the part, she had a section on the commentary that said that if you were to talk to people and say that they couldn't trust their senses, or they couldn't trust their minds, everything that we understand to be real and true comes in that way. And for you to say to them, it's not, there's nobody there, or it doesn't, your senses are mistaken. They're not telling you the truth, or your mind is being, mistaken, or there's been, you're not understanding how things exist. That could be really scary for people because we trust them so much to be able to identify our world. So they could easily misunderstand that. So does that mean we should not mention emptiness at all when talking to them about the Dharma? So what would that sound like?
Someone here says you can present it in terms of dependent arising, in a way that's easy to understand.
I have I put in here just a little example of, we have some neighbors down the road that are of Christian religion, Jehovah's Witness actually. And it's so interesting to go and visit them because even though they're not in the Dharma, to try to find something that we have in common about loving kindness and being honest and being ethical, when they really want to know whether we believe in the devil and whether we really think that God rules the universe and He really much determines how things go and how things are created, and that they really do believe in the resurrection, that when all is said and done in the day of judgment, there is something that does arise and that does resurrect. So they want to get into the meat of stuff when I go down there and visit, and all I want to do is talk about what nice people they are. And how nice we are, and that we, they're kind, they're honest, they're ethical, they live a very simple life, they're generous. And so try to be skillful when they get into the more fundamental disparities of Buddhism and Jehovah's Witnessism can be pretty interesting experience. But anyway, so far so good, so far so good. Then what kind of background should they have first? So what kind of foundation should people have to be able to hear emptiness? Is there anything that should be a foundation before that? What about those qualities of a suitable vessel? Would they be in here somewhere, maybe? I kind of went there.
Yeah, folks online were saying you should have faith, appreciation, and gratitude to the teacher and the teachings. So a suitable vessel.
And then also said teach the earlier stages of path to
Yeah.
give people a good preparation.
Yep. Yep.
Well established in karma, result.
Be very sensitive to where people are at.
Yeah.
And in Guy Newland's book Introduction to Emptiness, he quotes Tsongkhapa, who advises that everyone must proceed from the foundational practices to more advanced training. So as you train new and higher practices, you must constantly go back to balance your mind by practicing the earlier meditations again. Long after you've had success with basic practices, you should return to them so as to renew, sustain, and reinforce. Faith in your spiritual teacher, your understanding of impermanence, karma, and mortality, your disenchantment with cyclic existence.
Yeah, there's a lot to put underneath that.
You know, and when Khyentse Jampa was teaching here, he said, if you ever have occasion to, or you may have occasion, or someday you will have occasion to teach about emptiness, he said, if you teach dependent arising, you can't go wrong.
The king of reasoning. So they did get that. That was the first answer, right? Was to talk about dependent arising? Was that the?
Yeah, and someone phrased it quite nicely too. They said, if you hear about emptiness from the conventional view of how things depend on other things, use their own experience that they can see in the world around them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, very nice. Okay, so far so good. So number 12, which relates to verse 288, which I haven't been putting which verses these are attending to, because there's a number of them that Venerable sort of took a few together and then would put a question that would refer to a few of them. But 288, there is no other door to peace, and it destroys wrong views. That which is the object of all Buddhas is called selflessness. So why is realizing emptiness the only door to peace? Many responses, good.
Okay, let's start with the first. So, ignorance is the root of affliction, so wisdom is the only antidote that cuts it at the root. But it must be the correct view. And someone says, we have to understand emptiness in order to attain liberation of any of the three vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
No other door leads to liberation aside from realizing the emptiness of inherent existence. And nirvana is attained when we directly realize how things exist, and it cuts the root of cyclic existence.
Yeah, Venerable was pretty straightforward on the answer to that one. But why?
That doesn't, it says, okay, that's so, but why?
Is this the only thing that will get rid of your
Afflictions.
all of the different kind of obscurations, afflictive and
The cognitive obscurations which get in the way of liberation. Okay. Yeah.
You realize there's no I.
Yes.
You can't cut the root of samsara by any other means. Not by reciting 100,000 of this and that, not by having bodhicitta, not by developing renunciation. All those things alone by themselves can't bring liberation. They're important steps, but they don't cut the root of samsara.
Okay, so Khyentse Jampa Tekchak in his book, just to be a little bit more detailed about the process. The wisdom realizing emptiness is so effective in purifying karma and eradicating afflictions, which are the obstacles to liberation and to peace, because it apprehends phenomena completely opposite to the way ignorance apprehends phenomena. Thus it meets ignorance head on and can inflict harm on ignorance directly, not indirectly as other virtues such as love and compassion do. This is the great little analogy. For example, if we have to go to court, many people may advise us what to say and do when we get there, But what we really need is someone who stands up in court and proves to the judge and jury that what our adversary says is wrong. Similarly, the virtuous qualities such as compassion, fortitude, and concentration assist us on the path to awakening, but only the wisdom realizing the emptiness of inherent existence can prove without a doubt that the root of cyclic existence, the root of all of our troubles, the ignorance grasping inherent existence, apprehends phenomena in a mistaken way. All right, so it's cutting the ignorance. That's what we need to do.
What page is that?
Page 34. Anything else before I proceed, Venerable Damcha there? Anybody here? Okay, so 13. This one wasn't in any of the transcriptions, so, but we can talk about that. What is the difference between conceptual and non-conceptual realization of emptiness? Or did anybody find something in the transcriptions? I looked over all of them and I didn't see her go into the definition of these, so I went to paths and grounds. Anything? No?
We should know this, or
We should know this by now.
They're not sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can share with you what she wrote, just to make it clear, in Paths and Grounds, when she talked about the whole process of, and this is in the Bodhisattva Paths and Grounds, and we get to the path of preparation, which is where a lot of the conceptual realization of emptiness take place. So this is what she has said, and then we'll go into then the non-conceptual. You can see what is happening here, first of all, before you get to the union of serenity and insight, the path of preparation. Meditation is, here's my mind, and there's the object, and they are so distinct and unrelated and independent of each other. Like my mind and the object I am perceiving have nothing to do with each other. Okay, so this is like even before we get onto the path of preparation. When you start meditating on emptiness, things are still appearing as truly existent because it's a conceptual appearance, me here, emptiness there. But as you meditate more and more on emptiness, not love or compassion, then ascertaining emptiness as true existence and ascertaining your mind as true existence are being worn down. And the force of the conceptual appearance of emptiness is getting worn down. And the strength of emptiness appearing as an object separated from the mind is getting worn down. And the mind being separate from emptiness is getting worn down. Then with the union of serenity and insight, it's a much deeper realization of emptiness, but there's still a feeling of emptiness is here, my mind is there, and it's realizing emptiness. Even though emptiness is the lack of inherent existence, it's still conceptual, so there is still the conceptual appearance, which is a factor in dualistic appearance. So this is the heat and peak stages in the path of preparation, where the union of insight and serenity is really helping to deepen the inferential understanding of emptiness. You abide in space-like meditation, and the object you are analyzing to see if it's inherently existent doesn't appear. You might be analyzing the self to see if it exists inherently, and in the beginning the self appears that way, and the emptiness of the self appears, and the subject, the mind realizing that emptiness, also appears. But once again, the deeper and the more deep the insight and the serenity is that this kind of gets worn down. She kept saying that in this transcription, worn down, more and more subtle, worn down, worn down, worn down. Once you attain supreme mundane dharma, you are very close to a direct perception because you are not ascertaining the object as true existence, and you are not ascertaining the subject as true existence. You're almost there. As soon as that meditative equipoise becomes the uninterrupted path of seeing that starts to eliminate the artificial acquired afflictions, you're on the path of seeing, because in the uninterrupted path you have worn down the conceptual appearance of true existence. And once it's gone, that very instance when you have a direct perception without any type of conceptuality, you're on the uninterrupted path of seeing. And that's where you start eliminating the the acquired afflictions, and that's where things start to take off. That's kind of like step number 1, step number 2, step number 3, step number 4. Okay, and then here's Cancer Jump text. You can see how Venerable gets so precise on her steps because her teacher teaches just like this. The full direct realization of emptiness comes about gradually. Our first realization of emptiness is inferential and occurs by means of a conceptual appearance. This means that emptiness is understood conceptually. At this point, the conceptual appearance acts like a veil between the object, emptiness, and the mind perceiving it. So emptiness does not appear in a totally vivid way to the mind. Although the realization is clear and the mind ascertains emptiness, that is, the mind has reached certainty about the meaning of emptiness through sound reasoning and analysis, we are not yet able to cognize emptiness directly and non-conceptually. Gradually, as we continue meditating on emptiness, the conceptual appearance of emptiness will drop away, and our realization of emptiness will become a non-conceptual direct perception and therefore much clearer. That's on page 39, the power of realizing emptiness. So how about the non-conceptual realization? We've gone to, okay, now we're on the path of seeing. So what does meditative equipoise on emptiness look like?
What you just read.
Well, it just says then when it breaks down and it says it becomes non-conceptual direct perception. I just wanted a little bit more like the
Non-dual, no appearance of subject and
object,
no
yep.
appearance of true existence,
No appearance of conventionality, right. All the things that we know disappear.
That we can recite.
That we can recite, right.
But can't fathom, actually. I mean, what in the world is a direct mental perception even? You know, a yogic direct perceiver of the mind.
Like water mixing with water.
Sounds beautiful.
Sounds lovely. But we do know that, okay, so all the conventional appearances that we have, the appearance of true existence, all fall away. Subject and object gone. Yes.
Someone made 2 points here. I wonder if you could just respond because I'm not sure if they're on the right track.
Okay.
Okay, so one is conceptual is gained by reasoning, non-conceptual is gained through direct experience. Is it the gain? But you have to get to the
You have to-
non-conceptual through reasoning.
You have to, right.
Maybe you could.
Well, direct means that there's no subject and object. There's no appearance of true existence. So I'm not sure what
You're not reasoning at that point.
Yeah.
That's true. You no longer are.
But the experience, the conceptual appearance in meditating inferentially is also an experience of the mind. But it's conceptual. It almost sounds like you're doing some sort of theoretical thing here and then direct right here, where you're having an experience conceptually of emptiness and then you have a direct realization. So that's the two experiences that kind of look like they interface with each other.
And you're not using a generic image anymore.
Right.
The images are gone.
The conceptual appearance is gone.
It's gone.
You're actually seeing the apprehended object. I guess it would be the
It's ascertained.
ascertained.
And this other point by this person says, direct realization remains post-meditation, while conceptual knows things don't inherently exist, but they still appear that way out of meditation.
No, out of post-meditative equipoise, you do not have any direct realizations of emptiness.
Nobody until the Buddha.
Till the Buddha.
Until the Buddha. And then it's just
Things appear illusion-like, which is what happens, is that you start seeing, going, aha, this does not exist as it appears, but you don't have a direct perception of emptiness out of meditative equipoise until you become awakened. Okay?
It's also shocking.
Which is, like, how is that possible, to have direct, conventional, ultimate truth appearing at the same time?
Oh, I know what else you can say about that.
About what?
The direct
Yeah?
realization. It's indescribable with words.
Inexpressible.
Ineffable.
Ineffable, yes, the ineffable nature.
And bliss.
Yes.
Guy Newland says it in a nice, concise way. He says, powerful and correct analysis of emptiness, while conceptual and dualistic, gives rise to the ultimate mind, non-conceptual, direct perception of emptiness. Such direct realization is utterly non-dualistic. It is the fire of this wisdom, all the dualism of the original analysis is burned away.
Mhm. But the first part of that sentence that says that the inferential or the conceptual realization is like the major causes and conditions for finally the direct perception. So there's a huge piece to remember.
What's that from? What page?
Introduction to Emptiness.
What page?
I don't know. I'll have to let you know.
Okay, now we're going to go into a little bit more, well, more wrong views, but different. Is suffering virtuous? All the former Catholics say yes. Do we have any former
Abbey and
Judaic? Okay, suffering is a maturation and thus is not virtuous. Similarly, birth too is not virtuous, being a maturation of actions. Okay.
It's not virtuous.
Yeah, so question number 14 and question number 15 kind of go together. But let's start with the virtuous. Why is suffering virtuous, and if not, why not? And this was referring to, there were about 3 or 4 paragraphs where Aryadeva got into refuting the Nigranthas, who really believe that suffering is virtuous. These are the matted hair ascetics who really believe that standing on your foot for 16 days and not bathing and standing out in the sun all day are virtuous activities. That creates virtue. The suffering that they experience creates virtue. So this was Aryadeva's refutation of that doesn't work. I was wondering if we have any ascetic practices in our time that would be considered wrong views, that would be perceived as suffering as virtuous. Do we have anything? Like fire walking or self-immolation, self-flagellation?
Some kinds of dietary fasting seems like people getting into suffering and
Thinking that it's really beneficial? I don't know about beneficial. Euthanasia, assisted suicides.
People who group suicide bombers, like suicide bombers.
Oh, yes, yeah. I was just wondering whether this was just a very dated concept.
No,
It's not.
Well, I don't know about purification practices, Catholic purification practices, for example. The whipping of oneself in the hair shirts, and I don't know if people still do that, but maybe they don't. I think there's probably not some.
Lay on a bed of nails?
Yeah, not in the United States, but
Maybe in some of the more
conservative.
conservative Catholics in different countries.
Yeah, still.
Well, they do the passion play processions where in some of the South American countries where they put somebody on a cross and they walk them and they put them through the procession and stuff like that. I think there are some that do the whole kit and caboodle. Okay.
About animal sacrifice?
Animal sacrifices. But this is more personal suffering.
What about like the whole Japanese culture of ritual suicide for honor or dying for the emperor?
The kamikazes, suicide bombers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Aryadeva says that suffering is just the result of karma. Actions, karma, can be virtuous or non-virtuous, but the result of the actions in general is not virtuous or non-virtuous. It's just a result. So people that think that inflicting pain on their body is creating virtue are very, very mistaken. So then, the second part of that question is birth as a human being virtuous? And here he was addressing the Brahmins of the time who felt that being born into a Brahmin family was a virtuous thing.
Nope, it's just the result.
Someone points out here we have to create past virtue to have a human rebirth.
Mm-hmm.
A fortunate one.
And when we have it, that's not virtuous in and of itself, which is really kind of mind-blowing, that our results are like neutral.
There's only, of those 4 results, only one of them is virtuous or non-virtuous.
And that is
It's the habit.
the habit one,
All the others are neutral.
neutral.
But the habit you create, you could create habits that are virtuous, that will lead you to create virtue, and you can do habits create predispositions that will lead you to do non-virtue, and those are the ones that
Or the most
virtuous or non-virtuous.
dangerous.
They talk about it in terms of being non-virtuous, but I'm sure they must be both.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the result in the form, environmental, what's the very first one called?
Maturation.
Maturation, which is, yeah, that's the throwing karma.
Yeah, the one that puts you in a certain realm,
Mm-hmm.
neutral.
Mm-hmm. Hard to believe, but true.
You know, doesn't mean you aren't going to suffer.
Okay, so the Aryadeva talked a little bit about the Brahmins. He just said, you know, to be, it says that's why in other texts the Buddha says the real Brahmin is not the one that keeps fastidious purity, because they have this thing about doing rites and rituals just to perfection. They can't make any mistakes in what they're saying, what they're doing. That he said a real Brahmin is somebody that practices nonviolence, who practices kindness, who practices tolerance. So he was trying to talk to them, saying that just because you're born into this family doesn't mean that you've got some virtuous thing going on here. It's just a result.
Someone asked if you could repeat what Venerable Tapa just said about the types of karma, habitual karma.
There are the 4 different types of results of karma. There's the maturation or the throwing karma, which realm you're born into. That is neither virtuous or non-virtuous. There's the maturation that's concordant with the causes. So if you experience somebody hitting you, it's because you've done that in the past. So the result is not virtuous or non-virtuous, just a ripening of a karma. And then the environmental karma, where you're born like the environment, the landscape, the water, the poverty, is also not virtuous or non-virtuous. It's kind of a neutral. But the one that Venerable Tarpa said is the one that is the habituated habit, that you continue to do a particular sort of habit, that it can be defined as being virtuous or non-virtuous. Okay. I'll say then what is the difference between virtuous and being the result of virtue? I think we covered that. Anything else to add to that? What is the difference between virtuous and being the result of virtue?
One creates virtue and the other one is just expending it.
That's right, it's ripening. One's a cause and one's a result.
Is that true?
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, Venerable went into this. She said, now somebody's going to say, but we're always taught in the thought training teachings that if you're suffering, see it as an expenditure of your negative karma, and in that way you create virtue. So isn't suffering virtuous? No, the suffering is not virtuous. What is virtuous is how your mind deals with the suffering. The fact that you look at it and say, this is the result of my negative karma, therefore I'm not going to get mad at anybody else, and therefore I'll be more careful about my actions in the future. That thought is virtuous. The suffering you experience, neither. Not virtuous. Then she said at the same time, 11, she said, same thing with happiness. Happiness, believe it or not, is neither virtuous nor non-virtuous. It's just a feeling that arises due to virtue. But when we're happy, we can respond to happiness in 2 different ways, which can either create virtue or non-virtue. We can grasp onto it and want more and better and trample others to get more, in which case the happiness has caused non-virtue in the mind to arise. Or we can look at happiness and say, this is the result of my virtuous actions. Therefore, I'm really going to make more effort to do virtuous actions and delight in doing virtue and taking delight in being generous. So instead of being stingy, we train our minds in generosity, then ethical conduct, fortitude. So that way of responding to happiness creates virtue, but the happiness itself, like the suffering, is neither virtuous or non-virtuous. How we respond is the whole key. That's why there's this whole training of transforming happiness and suffering into the path.
Someone online asked, how do you define virtuous?
Actually, it was answered in Insight into Emptiness. It's abandoning harmful thoughts, words, and deeds.
And also it's defined in terms of what the results
The results are, if you experience happiness, it's virtue. If you experience suffering, the causes.
What was the thing you said before that? Okay.
Abandoning harmful thoughts, words, and actions as well as rituals.
That brings happiness. Okay, number 15. Explain the verse 289. In brief, Tathagatas explained virtue as non-violence and emptiness as nirvana. Here there are only these two.
Is it 289 or 298?
298. And then the second part of that is, how does that relate to the explanation of Buddhist view and conduct? This was another one of those that I wasn't quite sure what Venerable was getting at the first point and what she was getting at on the second point. Any takers? Okay.
Well, I have just a little bit. Conduct is non-violence,
Mm-hmm.
and view is the view of emptiness.
Okay. And these are, and what about it? But here are only these two. Anything about that?
So someone
Only way to attain something? Oh, that's virtue. Oh, it explains virtue. Okay. And explains emptiness. I got confused when she said, here there are only these two. What was she referring to by that? That they're the only two things that are crucial, important, needed. I wasn't, and I didn't get a... Let's see. Page 13.
Oh, in my notes, it says, listen and read this confusing.
I was confused.
And there's quite a long thing about
The natural
yeah.
natural nirvana and stuff that I didn't want to go to, so I chose not to. Let's see, I had page 13 here. Okay, so I have it in my room. So here's something that His Holiness said, and I put it down as being part of this, so let's see what happens here. He says, in the 400 verses, Aryadeva presents a specific procedure for proceeding on the path to enlightenment. This suggests that it is important to pursue the path in a systematic order, beginning by refraining from negative actions and maintaining an ethical, sound way of life. This is to ensure the attainment of a favorable rebirth so that we will be able to continue to pursue our spiritual path in the future. Aryadeva states that the first phase of the path is to avert the effects of negative and troublesome states of mind as they manifest in our behavior, because this safeguards us against unfavorable rebirth in the next life. In the next phase, the emphasis is placed on generating insight into the nature of no self or emptiness. And the final phase of the path is the total elimination of all distorted views and the overcoming of even the most subtle obstructions to knowledge. So that was how nonviolence and emptiness sort of relate to one another. But
It's quite clear from this verse. What she wrote there is the verse.
mm-hmm.
And then this commentary says, what we need is both virtuous methods based on nonviolence that diminish the importance of the ego and of the illusions, like morality, patience, love, compassion, bodhicitta, and wisdom based on emptiness. One is the accumulation of merit, the other is the accumulation of wisdom.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
Basically, that verse is pointing to the two wings of the
Bird. Okay.
And she has this one sentence that actually is the same thing. So the principle through which we attain higher rebirth is nonviolence, and the principle through which we attain liberation is natural nirvana.
Okay. And these are only these two.
Yeah, because the whole path
The whole path
Contained in those two. Okay. Okay, that's helpful.
And through one we attain higher rebirth and the other liberation.
Yeah, that's what we're going to hear next week.
Yeah, I heard you.
Definite goodness and
Higher state.
Higher status. Okay, then last but not least,
maybe got that one right.
Good job.
why is it important to be open-minded? Why is it important to think deeply about the teachings and how you cultivate these in yourself? So I think this is one of those just
It's an essay.
essay question. Yes. There's no right or wrong answer, folks, so tell us what you think. So what about, why is it important to be open-minded?
Well, I would say because you're always gonna be wrong. I mean, you're always swimming upstream with the Dharma. You're always going against a lot of wrong views that we hold in
Mhm.
every way, shape, and form. So if you can't have an open mind, you're like gonna sink.
Think. Yep. Yep. So I kind of same way as Venerable Tarpa, the best way to be able to hear teachings on emptiness is to have an open mind. If we are attached to what we think exists and how we think the world has to run, or in a permanent self or God, it will be very difficult to have the teachings go in so we can think about them. We are very attached to our views since we've had them since beginningless time, and these very same views have kept us trapped in cyclic existence. So being open-minded could be a really kind of a different way to think about things.
If we're not being open-minded, why bother listening to the teachings?
Right. And they won't go in.
This circles back to the very first question of the quiz about the qualities of a suitable
That's right.
vessel.
That's right.
And for sure, if you listen to the teachings very long, they're going to upset you. Sooner or later. So having an open mind to that discomfort is critical,
Yes.
because people leave
Yep.
when they get a little shaky,
Mm.
shaken.
So the open-mindedness actually lets the teachings go in without, with less resistance than well, being less scared, being less pissed off, being
I don't know.
unwilling.
Say from my own experience, being open and minded at least makes you tenacious when you are scared, angry.
Well, open-mindedness also lets me look at the stuff that I'm holding on to.
Exactly. Yeah, did Turtle have something to say?
Well, I think it's actually helpful to know that that's gonna happen.
Yeah.
And then you can kind of be ready to know that your mind's gonna close like a
Steel trap.
steel trap, and you need to work to open it back up.
Yeah.
So having realistic expectations
Mhm.
about what it means
Yep.
to practice
Yep.
is helpful. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes people don't run into them. I know out at Airway Heights, we've seen people just fold their books up, pack their clothes, and leave related to things related to karma. But sometimes I've presented that out there, and this one guy in particular said, I don't have any problems with karma. Like they just never ran into it. Maybe he will later, but
Mm-hmm.
at that point it just made so,
So much sense.
to him. It was like, so you just never know when you're going to run into something.
Yeah.
That thing that you can't, that karma is extremely hidden, the specific results,
Yeah.
that throws some people.
Yep. Yep. I know that I met probably some of the greatest narrow-mindedness when Venerable really got into, I think it was the mind training like rays of the sun or essence of refined. She just kept pounding the self-centered thought, just pounding it, pounding it, pounding it, all of its sort of permutations. And I was like, man, stop. I'm melting, I'm melting. It was like, that's where I was like, I want to just take my toys and go home. So then how do we cultivate them? How do we cultivate open-mindedness and all of these wonderful qualities of a suitable vessel? Okay.
Okay, let me share what the folks online have said.
Okay.
Someone brought up the teaching on the 3 thoughts.
Yes.
You're open-minded, that's it. You're not going to learn anything. Folks echoed what you said about how familiar the wrong views are to us, so all our buttons get pushed. And someone pointed out that you can't develop bodhicitta without being open-minded. And some of the karmic, how some of the teachings are just so radically different from
How we see things. Yeah.
and someone said, Venerable Samton's BBC teaching, shut up, then you might learn something. That could be how to cultivate it.
If the word open-mindedness doesn't work, just say shut up and be quiet. And then,
You have to have some feeling of having, how to say this, success with the teachings, seeing that, engaging with the teachings, you know, really using them,
Brings
brings
results.
results.
Yeah.
And if you just don't work at it, you won't have that, and you just say forget it.
Yeah, yeah. That happens every once in a while. We go to some of these meditation classes we do locally here. People come around and they share the same difficulty they've been having for 6 or 7 years. And when you really get down to the point of saying, well, have you been meditating every day? Well, no. And it's like, well, you know, part of the difficulty is that you're not meditating every day, so the problem is still the same. So there's kind of a little bit of a dependent arising going there. You've got to do a little bit of practice to really get the results, or else it's going to be there.
Yeah, meditate properly.
Yeah, not
A
just...
lot of times we're just reinforcing our closed-mindedness
Our wrong
during the
views.
sessions,
Yeah,
or our wrong views, you know.
yep. Just recapitulating them.
Yeah. And that's not good. That's not proper. But we do it.
We do.
I think too the main key when most of it is about you're not looking for transcendental answers. Day-to-day stuff.
Yeah.
You get to see.
There's something about magic, you know, we really want to have some sort of magic show, or Venerable with her magic wand, you know, I keep saying that. You think you're just going to put that magic wand out there and things are going to disappear and go away. It's just not going to happen.
But that's a borrowed answer by practicing.
Practicing is boring.
Every 250 sessions, you're going to have something transcendental.
All right, so start counting. Get your counters out, folks. Your 250th session, provided they're done consecutively, you're going to have a transcendental, maybe. Hopefully.
How else should you do them if you don't do them consecutively?
People missing them,
Exactly. It
Taking
doesn't.
time off.
taking time off.
You mean day by day by day.
Right.
Because consecutively means one after another, and you could have one 2 years later and have another, and they're
Well-
all consecutive.
Well, what would that be? Continually. Continually.
Contiguous.
Continuous. They've got to have a little thread between them. You have to have a thread between them. Then you start seeing things.
And if you have a lot of difficulty, like Venerable says, like just practice being kind. Kind and being
Yep.
virtuous. And then you'll see what happens.
Yep.
I also think how to cultivate these in yourself, I find it really helpful to have role models and to inspire myself with.
Mm.
Like recently I listened to a video again of that I've watched before of what's his name? Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. And I just find him so inspiring, you know. He was so kind to everyone he met. There wasn't, you know, he just radiated as like
Bodhicitta.
goodness. And you just think, I don't know, that
Yeah.
makes me want to cultivate these in myself. So that's how I
Yeah.
find a way to inspire yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's what happens when you have a group of Dharma friends that really support each other, is that we start inspiring each other. That's a big piece. All right. So next week, do we have Venerable back? So next week, folks, we're going to begin the Precious Garland. Venerable's going to give the commentary. She has received teachings on that from a number of her teachers, and she has taken a request to start on that next week. So we are indeed fortunate, and so stay tuned for next week.